Hi, Math 98. We are starting Module 4 now that we have the Module 3 test over with. We're only going to be doing lessons 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. So we're doing 4.1 and 4.2 this week. We'll do 4.3 at the beginning of next week. There's a Module 4 quiz, not a big test, but a smaller quiz just to cover those three sections. And then we'll be also next week reviewing for the final. So hard to believe we're at that part of the semester. The nice thing about Module 4 is that all three sections, all three lessons, really are very similar. So you're not going to be learning three totally different concepts. They're really very similar. They're all talking about linear equations. And if we think about linear equations, we can see the word line, right, in linear. So linear equations, when we graph them, they form a straight line. Okay, that is because they have the variable, like the x or whatever her variable is, to the first power. It's not squared, it's nothing like that. So they're a little bit simpler looking equations. And we can also talk about linear models. So if we say linear models, that just means it's an equation that's showing what's actually happening in some situation. Today we'll have one context about cell phone bills and one context about a debit or a gift card that's used like a debit card. And so the equation we write, excuse me, is a model because it's showing what's happening in that actual situation. All right, so in problem situation 1, we're on page 421. It says data plans for cell phone plans can be purchased in two different ways. So one's an unlimited data plan, where the customer pays a set monthly fee for unlimited data. The other is a per gigabyte plan, where the customer pays a set monthly fee plus a specified amount for each gigabyte. The gigabytes are not prorated, so that means it doesn't matter if the customer uses 1/1000th of a gigabyte or 1 gigabyte. They must still pay for the entire thing. So that's what happens, right? If you buy a gigabyte of data and you only use a little bit of it, they don't give you the rest of your money back, right? You still have to pay for that 1 gig at a time. All right, so at the bullets there, you see just kind of a recap of those two types of plans. So a monthly fee of $35 plus $10 per gigabyte, or then the unlimited plan costs $80 per month. So the first question there is, which one is cheaper, or less expensive? Another way we could phrase that question is to say, if you were going to pick a plan, which plan would be better for you? So just take a minute to think about that. If you were going to pick a cell phone plan between those two, maybe you've had something similar you've had to look at, what makes one of those better for you than the other? Okay, so you might have thought, well, it depends on how much data we use, right? So if you don't use any data or very little data, it's going to be better for you to pay a lower monthly amount and then just pay for the data you use. But if you use a lot of data, then that $80 one would probably be better for you because you're not paying for every little bit, it's all included in there. So there's not one that's always less expensive, it depends on what your situation is. And we'll see that in a little bit too. Okay, so if we look at the next page, on the next page, on page 422, there are two charts there. And these are going to help you see the pattern that's happening so that we can build these linear models. So the first chart is about the per gigabyte pricing. So they're calling that P. So in the chart, we have the number of gigabytes that are used. We have here the costs. This middle part is kind of like a little workspace. And then over here, we have the equation. All right, so when there are 0 gigabytes used, our cost is just going to be $35. And our P is just going to equal 35. P stands for the price for the per gigabyte plan. So that's what this is, the per gigabyte plan. Okay, what if I use 1 gigabyte with this plan? Well, then my cost is going to be $35 plus $10. So one way we can write this is 35 plus 10. I'm not going to add those together right now because I kind of want to see a pattern. Okay, what if I use 2 gigabytes? Well, in that case, I'm going to have $35 plus 10 for the first gigabyte plus another 10 for the second gigabyte. Okay, so sort of following this pattern, it's $35 plus, well, we might remember talking about before that if I add the same thing over and over and over, repeated addition is multiplication. So this is 2 times 10. And similarly up here, we could call this 1 times 10 if we want, right? We have 1 10 to add to it. Now we have 10 plus 10 is the same as 2 times 10. So if we have 3 gigabytes, we have 35 plus 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, 3 gigabytes. So the price is going to be 35 plus 3 times 10, right? This is 30. This is 30. The reason I want to write it like this is we can kind of see the pattern here. Now you can see a pattern here also, but I'll show you why it would get a little bit either hard to use or impossible to use. So if you look at this chart, it goes up to 5 gigabytes. And then we have a line, kind of like 3 little dots. It just sort of means, okay, it skips for a little bit. And then we have 10. And then we have G down here. So take a minute. You can use this middle workspace or you don't have to. But see what your equation would look like for these next 3. For 4, 5, and 10. Okay, so I would encourage you to pause the video, try those on your own, and then come back. Okay, so if we're doing this middle part, it's 35 plus, now I'm writing a little smaller because I have 4 gigabytes, 4 tens to write there. I can use this pattern to say 4 times 10. So now let's stop doing this for a minute and just come over to this part. If we have 5 gigabytes, I'm going to pay $35 plus 5 times 10. I could still write it out, same thing. Now when we get here and we've used 10 gigabytes, this is where it just gets a little tedious to write out 10 tens, right? So we can, once we see this pattern, we can just jump right over here. There. Okay, so we can look at these and say, okay, here's my monthly fee plus 3 gigabytes plus 4 gigabytes, right? Okay, so with this pattern, we could really fill in for any number here. What if I went crazy streaming movies one month and I used 40 gigabytes? Well, it would be 35 plus 40 times 10. Okay. Now, what's the meaning of this G over here? Well, this is our variable. It stands for how many gigabytes. And this would be if I don't know how many, right? I want to be able to figure out my equation, my price, no matter how many gigabytes I have. We talked about formulas in the last module. So I want to say, okay, what in general, what happens if I have some unknown number of gigabytes? Well, think about the pattern here. In every case, this is my monthly fee. This is how many gigabytes, and each gigabyte costs $10, right? So I can still use that same pattern whether I know the number of gigabytes or not. So if I don't know the number of gigabytes, my per month price, my monthly price, is still going to follow that same pattern, right? If I know it's 3 gigabytes, 3 goes there. If I know it's 5, 5 goes there. If I don't know, I can just put G for my variable, and then I can substitute in any number I want for that number of gigabytes. All right, so that is the cost of the per gigabyte plan. Okay, here's our equation or our linear model showing what a monthly amount is. Now, if you look in the middle here, it says 35 plus, and then it just sort of has an opening there, and it says T times down here. It really should say G times. Just like if it was 4 gigabytes, there were 4 tens. If it's G gigabytes, there are G tens there. So this is why I can't even write out this middle part, because I don't know how many tens I have, right? It could be any number of them in here, but I can just represent that so that I can get my equation there, my model. All right, now I want you to look at the next chart. Take a minute or two to think about how the unlimited plan works depending on how many gigabytes you use. Okay, so just take a minute to think about that. Think about how that works. Think about how your price is going to change based on how much you use. So think about that. I'm going to erase most of this. You see if you can plug in the equations for the unlimited one. Okay, so maybe the way I said that was almost tricky, right? How it's going to change. Is it going to change? No, that's how that unlimited works. So the unlimited one, remember, it's 80 gigabytes. So that, $80 with unlimited gigabytes. So that first row of your chart, if you use 0 gigabytes, you're going to pay $80. What if you use 1 gigabyte? Well, you're still going to pay $80, right? What if you use 473 gigabytes? You're still going to pay $80. So no matter what, you're going to pay $80. So you notice the pattern there that the cost is always 80. My equation is always 80. This equation does not have a G in it like this one does, because the cost does not at all depend on the number of gigabytes. Okay? It doesn't. It just depends. It just always stays 80. All right. So what we want to do now is in that last chart for this problem on page 423, you're asked to fill in a chart showing how the costs compare for the two plans. So in this chart, we have the number of gigabytes used, and this is going to go from 0 up to 8. Okay, I'll fill those rest in a minute. We have the monthly, the per gigabyte plan, which we're calling P. And then here we have the unlimited plan, which we were calling U. Okay, so this actually is not going to take you as long as it looks like it's going to for this large chart. Okay, let's start with the unlimited plan first. And I want you to think about what the cost of that unlimited plan is for 0 gigabytes, for 1 gigabyte, for 2 gigabytes. Think about the unlimited plan and what the cost is. So we just need a number here. Okay. Then I want you to think about, once you've done that, it will not take you very long to fill in that chart. Then I want you to think about the per gigabyte plan. This is our model. So using this, just like we were using formulas last module, how would I figure out how much it costs for 0 gigabytes? How would I figure out how much it costs for 1 gigabyte, for 2 gigabytes? You're going to start noticing a pattern. You can kind of use that pattern to help you fill in the chart because I'm going up in order. If I went 0, 1, 2, 3, and then had 15, and then 27, you'd have to kind of be careful, right? But these are really in order. So once you see the pattern, you can kind of just fill that in. I will end this video now, but when I start the next one, we'll have this filled in and we'll talk about those amounts.